Okay, good morning. We're going to start now the second Sichah of the project Likkutei Sichos. This Sichah is in Chilach of Beis, Bhar, Sichah, Beis. Okay, the Rebbe says like this. In Heintige Sedra, sagt die Teire, als Yid, was hat sich verkauft, als Eved, so hat zweiten Yidin, in Venice, kom Shnas HaYevel, wie jetzt im Imach, hu one of Imay. In this week's parsha, the Torah tells over that if a Yid sells himself as a slave to another Yid, so when the Shnas HaYevel arrives, the year of Yevel comes, in other words, the 50th year, and as we know, every 50th year, which is the culmination of 7 Shemitah cycles, so the halacha is that all Yidden go out by Yevel. So the Torah says, he, the servant, shall leave you, in other words, the master, and he and his children with him. That's what the Torah says. In other words, even if he sells himself, and even if he decides he wants to stay, Allah is one of Imay, he and his children go out for free. They go out free. They leave you. Stelt zu Rashi auf, who one of Imay, or is a Mefarish, Reb Shimon, im hu nimker banov mi machron, mikan shilabe chai b'mezines banov. Rashi takes the words, he and his children with him, and he quotes from Shimon says, if he was sold, so who sold his children? In other words, the Torah says, that he, the servant, shall leave his master, he and his children with him. So Rashi quotes from Reb Shimon, if he sold himself, if he was sold, but who sold his children? Rather, from here we learn that that a master is obligated to provide food for his servants' children as well. So the Rebbe says like this. We have to understand. The Shaila in Pasuk is Doch Blois Banov Mi Acharon. The question about the Pasuk is simply, who sold his children? Heit, Vosog Rashi Uich Taktoma Im Hu Nimker. So why does Rashi say if he was sold? The question is only Banov Mi Acharon. So all Rashi had to say is, or Reb Shimon, Banov mi Acharon, who sold his children, because we understand that we're talking about somebody that sold himself. So why does Rashi have to add the comment of im hu nimkar? We know that he was sold. Now, Aval Piaz, this is the lashon of front of Shimon. You're going to say this is the terminology, this is the teaching, this is what Rav Shimon says. So he's just quoting Rav Shimon. So we quoted, and we said many times that when Rashi references a Chazal, he doesn't quote verbatim, word for word, he just quotes us Nigea Tipshat. Well, therefore, is of the mol mashana pshita mashma the mekat konushin azel. And that's why many times Rashi condenses the wording of the Chacham to align the teachings with the meaning of the simple pshat of the pasuk. So now the question is, why? Yes, you're quoting Reb Shimon, but imhu nimkar is not necessary to understand. That was never the question. It never goes further. To me, is that in them is noch darker. The question is even greater. In the parsha from Eved Ivri, in Parshas Mishpatim steht, Im Bal Ishahu, Yatsi Ishtei Imay. In Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah says, if he, this Jewish servant, is married, his wife shall go out with him. When Rashi says, Yatsi Ishtei Imay, Rashi quotes that his wife shall go out with him. So Rashi says, who brought her that she should have to go out? Rather, the Torah tells us that a person who buys a servant is obligated to feed. Zedman as Rashi sagt, takin in der Agdama imu nimker, nor reflect life if ishte, chimich nisa. So we see that Rashi, when he quotes when the Torah speaks about the servant going free, and speaks about his wife, Rashi goes right away. Chimich nisa. Rashi is quoting, why? Because we know about the servant, there was never a question. Hein, for was da, and unser Mesedra is a yamak imu nimker. So why in our Sedra does Rashi quote and have to preface it by if he was sold? The Pella is not gnes. The question is even stronger. The Makkah from the Maimer of Shimon was Rashi bring Parsha Senu is in Gemara. The source of the Shimon in our Parsha is found in the Gemara in Kiddushin. Und dort bringt sich, als Rashi hat gedacht in der Pasuk von Mishpatim, in dorten, okay, I'm starting again. The Pella is noch größer. Der Makkah von Maimer of Shimon, was Rashi bringt, wie Pashasino is in the Gemara Kiddush, we said. Und dorten bringt sich, als Shimon hat euch gedacht in der Pasuk von Spaten wie Yasa ishte imoi in demselben Signet. Aber der Shimon imu nimkar ishte min nimkar mikan shtabe chayim choli. Und mit das Wagen ist dort in Rashi nicht matig den Lashon von meinem Leben Shimon imu nimkar. Nur bringt von Michilte, wie Michilis Shatetza. Und wenn he dann bringt dem Lashon von dem Shimon. So now the Rebbe says the question is even stronger. The teaching of the Shimon in this quote in our Parsha is found in the Gemara. The Gemara mentions that Shimon also darshan the pasuk in Mishpatim. His wife shall go out with him, using the same lashon in our parsha. What did Rav Shimon say? If he was sold, who sold his wife? And rather, he says we see that his master is obligated to feed her as well. Nevertheless, there Rashi does not quote Rav Shimon's entire phrase. If he was sold, instead Rashi quotes to the Mechilta, who brought her in, that she should have to go out. So why in our parsha does Rashi cite Rav Shimon? Nachber, even more so. Oich was Rashi bringt die Wörter Ban of Mim Acharon is nicht verstandig. Also, this Rashi said who sold his children is also not understood. In Teres Keren da bringt sich lechatchil der limit von Pasuk Rabbi Chaim Mazenes Banov. Under Akdamas Hashala Ban of Mim Acharon. Hat doch Rashi, was da in Berushi is, nicht zu maktum sein die Scheile in Pasuk in der Nacht geben dem Tisch. Nur zu sagen lechatchil bloß dem Pirush in Pasuk, avade gedarf or even mit dem Pirush, Mikal Shel Bechem Zenes Banov. It's a maximum Zan, the Shaila Banov Mimechern. Now, Rashi quotes, the question is, why does Rashi quote, who sold his children? What does that mean? Teres Kenem, on our pasuk, says the teaching of that his master is obligated to provide for his children without first asking who sold his children. And we know Rashi's approach is not to begin with a question of the pasuk, but rather his approach at the outset is to explain the meaning of the pasuk. So Rashi should have just said simply, from here we see that the master is obligated to provide food for his servants' children without giving the whole akdama of Bano Mim Acharon. Alright, so let's just go over. We have a bunch of questions now. Let's just go over and get some clarity. We said in this week's parsha when another Yid sells, Chaman al-Atzan sells himself as an Evet to another Yid, so when Shnas Yibah comes, the Torah says, that the guy who sold himself, leaves, him and his children. So Rashi asks, says, him and his children, the Torah says, who one of Imai, Rashi quotes Amr Shimon, if he sold himself, who sold his children? That's not an automatic status that if you sell yourself, you sell your children as well. Rather, the Torah teaches us from the words, who one of Imai, that a master who buys a person has to know that he has a requirement to feed his children as well. So the question is, the Rebbe asks, the question was bothering Rashi is about his children. who sold his children. So Rashi does not have to give the whole akdama of Imu Nimkar Bana Mimikaran. You're singing in a quote the Lashon of Reb Shimon, but we know that Rashi, even when he quotes Ma'amar Chazal, he only quotes was Negiyat Pshat. And the Rebbe says the question is even more so. Because in Parshas Mishpatim, when it speaks to the Eved Ivri, if he gets married, V'yotza Ishta Imi, that his wife leaves with him, so Rashi quotes over there, who brought her in, that she has to go out. Rather, it teaches us that if you buy a master servant, Chayvim Mazenis of his wife. So what do we see? We see that Rashi does not give the whole Hakdama of Imu Nimkar. He says, he just asks about the wife, Mi Yichnisa. So why does Rashi bring the Hakdama? The question is, the source of Rashi is Reb Shimon and the Gemara, and Reb Shimon Take brings the whole question of Imu Nimkar Yishtem Nimkar. Because should have Chayiv. And we see that, nevertheless, Rashi does not quote the whole Hakdama in Parshas Mishpatim. So why over here does he? And we ask the question is, enough where we said, even Rashi who brings the words Bana Mimacharan, it's also not understood. In Teres Kainim, he also brings from the limud of Rabbi Chavim Zinis, he doesn't give the whole Hakdama. So Rashi also the should not give the whole Hakdama of Bana Mimacharan. Just go straight to the answer. So the Rebbe says in Beis like this: L'chayr avot megikent mazber zayin dem shinei zwischen die zwei Pirushei Razal. As das is Talei and dem shinei Lashon and the zwei Psukim. L'chayr we can answer the difference between Rashi's two explanations. It could be explained that it's based on the difference in the wording of the two Psukim. In order to the pasuk state, Hu uvanav imei. In our pasuk it says, he and his children with him. Didn't even let Rashi regen them Hu nimkar vanav mimachar. So since in our pasuk it says, he and his children with him, so Rashi also says, if he was sold, who sold his children? On them vartu, Rashi was v'chimi yichlisa. So the Rebbe says you could say, like, very obviously the Rebbe's not going to like this answer, but you could say that in our pasuk it says the word who, so therefore Rashi is bothered by imhu nimkar bana mimacharn. In the Bhar the Torah doesn't say anything about him; it just says v'yotza ishta imay. Doesn't say the word who. So therefore Rashi just focuses on her. The Rebbe says, or the Hezron is klamat maspik. This explanation is inadequate. Rashi wrote his commentary very, very meticulously. And Rashi does not use flowery lashenis, play on the words, and so on and so forth. About Imhu Nimkar is nitkein pirush even vortul. As since if he was sold is not an explanation of the word he in the pasuk. Again, about Imhu Nimkar is nitkein pirush even vortul. As since when it says about Imhu Nimkar, it's not an explanation of him. Nor bazak davat zu bana mimachar as we manashach. So this whole thing of this Imu Nimkar, it's all a preface to getting to the point of Bana of Mimachar, who sold his children. So the Rebbe says, the question, you have a question. If you're going to say that when I have the question of who sold his children, I must give the preface of if he was sold, who sold his children. So Rashi should have said this preface also in Parshas Mishpatim. Rabbi Shalom for the Nitya Akdama was to fire break this Nitya Rashi Mishpatim was break the Parshas Mishpatim. And so in our parsha, and if the question does not require one, which is why Rashi makes no thing in Parshas Mishpatim, why does Rashi make it our parsha? Was Bezagin you have to say as is the Ashine Teichen zwischen die zwei Psukim. Was der Far mit euch rechnen während was. So you obviously have to say there's a difference in the matter of our pasuk and was der Far wird euch rechnen während was. And this also is going to resolve why number one, Parshas Mishpat to bring an Ashi Nid Maimer of Shel from Mechilta. Pasha is Masam Dafka my Reb Shimon. First, he's going to explain why does he quote the Reb Shimon, why he does not quote Reb Shimon, but instead he quotes the Mechilta, whereas in our Parsha, Rashi does quote Reb Shimon's teaching. And base Parsha says Rashi matik eichtum Shem balamayim Reb Shimon. Like that, but Rashi also mentions the author's name of Reb Shimon. Rashi again, Parshas Mishpatim, bring it to Rashi the Shem balamayim Reb Mechilta Reb Yitzchak. Or in Parshas Mishpatim, Rashi does not bring the author Reb Yitzchak. Kibble. Nachat Tmiya in the Tzvi Pirush Rashi. Another question points out on both Rashi's interpretation. Parshas Mishpatim Zog Rashi Magen HaKasuv Chai B'Mezeres Ishtei U'Banov. In Parshas Mishpatim, Rashi says that he's obligated to provide for his wife and his children. Chochem Pasuk Verin Banav Nitamon. Even though the Pasuk doesn't say anything about the Banav. Zogim Mefarshim. As das was Rashi's Meisiv Banav meint nicht zu sagen as man lernt es ab von Pasuk Yasa Ishtei. And the Mefarshim say that by adding his children, Rashi doesn't mean to say that the Allah is learned from his wife Yatsa Ishtim that his wife shall go out with him. But Gomer, as we mentioned, the pasuk that Norwegen Ishtay, he only speaks about his wife. Coming from them, nicht wissen die Mizenes Bonov. Only steht in Gemara noch mal ab Yiswar Yishlemer. As darf Ishke, was sie schämt sich bechazel ab Sachen. Es Rabbi Chabim Mizenes Sel. Aber nicht Bonov. The Gemara says, and also it's logical to say that the Torah says that the master is specifically obligated to provide the servant's wife with food, not his children, since a woman could feel embarrassed going door to door to ask for food. Nor Ribada sagt dem Din von Besinnes Ishtei bei der Schein der Agav euch dem Din von Besinnes Banov. Verlassen dich sich, if in Pasuk also said that. Steht Tag in Mechilta, Chayim Besinnes Banov, Shnemer B'yotze Mi'imachu Baravimei. And in fact, Rashi relies on the pasuk in our parsha, as the Mechilta says, he's obligated to provide food for her and for his children. As it says, he shall leave, he and his children with him. So that it says over the Bia is talking in Gadol. This explanation is very, very doesn't work. While Levad says was the Fiza Rashi Bash saying that the money that Agav Eich Ishtei. Besides the fact which Rashi should have mentioned his wife, Eich when the Ishtei Takiteres Kenem Ma Chayev Bar Rabbi Chabim Zenes so Af Rabbi Chabim Zenes Ishtei Bonov. So first of all, I should have said this, that just as his wife, his master is obligated for his food, his master is also obligated to provide food for his wife and children. Is Madach as the Mechilta darf opteifen, the Perish as Museum Bonov Leitman up von an andere Pasuk, hat doch Rashi, was es Mefarish Friedrich und Mikla, und euch, bin ich aber sicher gedacht, was sie sagen, das ist ein So Rashi, according to Rashi, who we know Rashi explains Pashta Pshat, you must say that concerning the servant's children's food can be learned from the pasuk concerning his wife's food. But why do we need another teaching derived from this pasuk in order to, in our parsha, to obligate the master to provide food for his master for the servant's children? As Rashi, which is literal derech hapshat, can ja planen Zenes Banov von Zenes Ishtei. So you must say that according to Pashut Pshat, that we could learn out that the master is obligated to provide food for his servant's children. And the question is, verstandig, was darf man haben noch ein Limud von dem Pasuk Pashut Zin as the Abba is Chayim Zenes Banov. So why do I need to have another interpretation, another explanation that the master is obligated to provide for his servant's children? It means not because Rashi Parsha says Medag Bullshit. Elo Mikan Shad Abichai was Espano. Rashi in our Parsha uses the word. From here, we see that a master is obligated to provide food for his servants' children. Linking in Parsha Mishpatim, who are Zaktim Lashon Magid. Not like, in other words, the sources in our Parsha. Rashi's man says the limit is Mikan Dafki or Nit from under the earth. Rashi says we're learning it from Parsha's Bhar, not somewhere else. Of this, as they say, Peter Rashi's and comes out that the two interpretations of Rashi are b'seisra, because are we learning it out from here or are we learning it out from there? Okay, we'll stop over there.
Sure.
Bye, Nick.